Melanie Shore, welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Thank you, Tanner. I'm glad to be here.
I'm super excited. It's funny because when I first started the show, you were one of the names that came to mind as someone to have on, and I started doing some research, and you had done a recent interview with Emily Merrill, who's a Utah singer and podcast host. She has a show called Artemis, and in it, you had really quickly off the bat said, I never really thought about happiness, like playing music. I never really struggled with that. It was just really natural for you to enjoy it. And at the time, for me, it was like, oh, well, she's not going to be a good guest on the show because she hasn't like struggled to enjoy doing this. And for whatever reason, I was convinced that like this needs to be perspectives of people who were unhappy doing this and now they're happy again. And now I'm like, well, that is ridiculous. If anything, I'm really interested now in knowing like what do you think it is about your relationship with music that has allowed it to be just a positive thing where you didn't feel stressed about having to do it.
It's fascinating, right? Yeah, as a kid, I never struggled to practice. I just loved it, but I think it's cuz I didn't have any pressure to do it.
Mm.
So, I teach students now and I see that they have a lot of stress in their lives and a lot of stuff going on and a lot of outside pressure. And and I notice that if I had had certain circumstances like that, or maybe I had had a teacher that approached teaching me differently, then my relationship with music would have been totally different. So I always in my head, it's kind of this coping mechanism. I don't like to do anything unless it's fun. So
Yeah.
I think I've gotten used to kind of turning things into games or into little challenges. And one thing that's really interesting psychologically, and there's a book, by the way, called Flow that's amazing. Like all musicians should read it, all people should read it. It's about the
Okay.
psychology of optimal experience. And
Mm.
I just finished reading it, and a lot of it resounded with me because I, despite growing up loving music and playing music, my relationship with music as a job is totally different.
Mm.
And that is where I've had a lot of struggle with trying to care about things. So anyway, back to that book. They talk in there about how positive feedback is so important for the brain and doable steps. And they tell different stories about rock climbers or musicians and artists and prisoners of war. And and basically your brain can turn any circumstance into something positive if you have the right tools to do that. And so, kind of reading that book helped me to realize, oh, maybe I just kind of came pre programmed with some good coping skills. One
Okay.
of the stories in the book is this guy that was a prisoner of war for years, and the way that he dealt with his circumstances, he was looking around and it's like, okay, he's in this 8 by 8 cell for years. There's nothing he could do. He had no control over anything, couldn't change things. But what he could do was control what was in his mind. And so he started practicing his golf swing in his mind and visualizing being somewhere else, doing something else. So fast forward, he gets released and he enters a golf tournament, and guess who did really great playing golf? That guy. And so so I think mindset and internal circumstances definitely have been helpful for me, and I think some people are more prone to that than others, but yeah, I've noticed that just naturally I set doable goals for myself.
Mm.
And I've really worked on goal setting for a lot of my adult life, especially my professional musician life, because, like, so let's say, for example, in jazz, okay, I'm going to transcribe this super awesome Keith Jarrett solo. Awesome. I'm going to transcribe it and play it in all 12 keys. Well, then I start sitting down and trying to do it in all 12 keys, and it's way too much at the time. Okay, let's cut the goals in half. I just keep cutting in half and cutting in half and cutting in half until I can do something that is complex enough that the positive feedback that it gives me is rewarding but doable enough.
Mm.
So I think that's where my ease in playing has come from, because I've always treated it like a game. I've always said to myself, if playing music is not fun anymore, I'm not going to do it. And sometimes I actually have gotten to that point with certain types of gigs, or
Yeah.
where I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. But music, I think, is a neutral thing for me. It's
Hmm.
it's whatever I make of it. And my favorite thing to do is be at home by myself playing piano. That's where I find the most joy. So I never really got into being a pro musician
Ah,
because of
eh,
what others gave me from it. It's very internal.
that's really interesting. So it sounds like you're really aware of like these little mini successes. Is it that you just acknowledge them? Is it like you give yourself a pat on the back, like you actually recognize them and take time to feel good about them? What what does that positive feedback loop, like what's the experience of that like for you?
It's interesting because as humans, we think that when we get to accomplishing a goal, that then that's when we're going to have the positive feelings.
Right.
And yeah, it will give us positive feelings, but it doesn't last. Anybody that's done an album is like, sweet, I've done my album. Well, now I need to do another album, right? And so that cliche of the joy is in the journey is so true. We have these guideposts in our life of goals, but our skills and everything are cultivated along the way with all the failures and all those things. Um, so for me, I guess I'm trying to think of how to put it. It would be, I don't revel a lot in accomplishing the thing.
Mm,
I really like learning how to do the thing. And instead of looking at things as, oh, I suck versus, oh, I'm awesome, I look at things as, okay, well, there was one way that I tried that didn't work out. Let me try another way. I know that this way doesn't work. I use this a lot with improv with my students, but I started playing jazz later than some people. I didn't start until I was in college. So I'm really aware of the whole learning process of it. And if you go back to me just learning the piano, I was 5 and I don't remember. I don't like I couldn't tell you how I remember how I found middle C. I don't know. I just know it's
mhm,
there. But I can remember how just knowing that I was going to have to do improvisation and learn chords and learn voicings and all that stuff. I remember that. I remember the confusion I felt around it. I remember that it felt like this mountain that I would never ever figure out. I remember feeling like an idiot because I thought I was so dumb that I started later, but I didn't know any better. I didn't know what the skill was, right? So, um, with improv specifically, somebody told me, hey, it's totally cool if you play a solo that sucks. You actually need to play at least 1,000 solos that suck. Now, who knows if it's an arbitrary number, right? But the whole point of that is in order to get better at something, you have to try different things. You get to decide if you see those as failures or if you see those as experiences.
mm,
So I remember, I remember the day the shift happened. I was soloing for a long time. I was playing in some bands and stuff because I got pretty fluent, relatively fluent in with those skills pretty fast, but I was not confident about it. And I just thought, oh, people are telling me I sound good and they're lying. I hate this so much because I'm not in my happy place at home playing. And it's like I cared so much about sounding good that I never felt like it was enough. So I
mm,
think that we can be our own worst enemy and we can be in the way of ourselves when our expectations of ourselves aren't lining up with reality. And so as soon as I changed it to be like, oh, I'm taking a solo, it's my turn. It doesn't mean anything about I'm a good person or a bad person. It just
right.
means that I'm taking a solo. Like, let's neutralize it. And as soon as I was able to neutralize that and look at it as, nope, I'm just going to check that off on my crappy solos, and now I have 998 crappy solos. Maybe, maybe it's getting me to where I'm sounding better. It just creates experience. And so reframing stuff has always been a huge part of things in my mind, and in my journey with music and with life and all sorts of things. So
Yeah.
That
No,
makes
yeah, I'm
sense.
that does. I'm big into reframing. That could be like the subtitle to everything that happens on this show. And I really resonate with what you were saying about, well, I guess it's kind of funny. I've been a good practicer, like while I've been a musician, always enjoyed it and done a lot of it, but I think I've always really thrived in a performance setting and enjoyed being on stage and in that energy. And more so like over the pandemic of like not performing and just having to come to terms with what my relationship with music is outside of performance. I felt like I've gotten to a place where I really, not that I'm just good at it, like I do it regularly, but enjoy practicing and have found that happy place in that solitude of the experience of growing and getting better, which is super exciting. And in a way, like it was kind of proof that the joy for me isn't on the gig necessarily. It's like getting better. And that happens in the practice room. And now it's been funny because after a few gigs, it was like, I'm used to this being the highlight. And now I'm just excited to go back home and practice more. And it's just been a different perspective of like what it is to be on stage. Like I've never had performance anxiety per se, but I've always enjoyed it. But now it's just a different relationship. And I'm curious if you could explain in more detail what it is about, maybe it is just performance anxiety or playing in public. What is weird about you sharing that experience that you find at home in your happy place in public?
Okay, this might relate to this. I think it does. But one thing that I don't have to worry about when I'm at home playing is how I look and my face.
Mm.
And so I've done touring where I'm on stage and it's a band and you have to look like you're having fun. And so it's very foreign to me to do that because I am having fun, but I have like the best resting bitch, the best resting bitch face ever. So there's that. But as far as performing, I mean, it's been hard for me because I never wanted. I actually like did not want to gig. People started asking me to gig, and I hated it because it felt so inauthentic to me.
Mm.
I also was
What was
insecure.
inauthentic? Like, what about it?
I
Just
would
having to put on a face, or was it more than that?
I would see people that got into music because, and their main reason that they would say was, I'm doing this because I love how I feel when the crowd claps for me. It's like gives me energy. And I'm like, I would rather be behind the curtain and just, I really love playing these chords so much. So
Mm.
I didn't really relate with that motivation of starting to get into music. And over time, I learned that it's okay. Everybody has different motivations. Sometimes I also am pretty sensitive to other people's energies, and so I had to learn over the years how to navigate that. And I have learned since that there's the energy of the crowd, there's the energy of my bandmates. If somebody has a bad vibe on stage, I pick up on that.
Mm.
And what do I do with that information? So I've spent a lot of time trying to learn how to decide what energy is mine and what is my own, and see if I can get to a point on stage where I am feeling that safe, intimate connection with music, even though I'm on stage and there's all these other stimuli going on. So,
Fair.
I mean, lots of musicians are ADHD, like raise his hand right here, right? So, lots of distractions. I feel like I don't hear anybody else's thoughts except for mine when I'm by myself, and it's not that way when we're with other people.
Mm.
So, and sometimes, like, especially with when you're dealing with improv and things like that, you are trying to listen to other people play and create something together. So, even if they are backing you up, it's like, we're jamming, Tanner. It's like you play a cool rhythm and I want to integrate that into my solo. I know that I have to be good enough with my own chops so that I can pick up on that and then turn it into something. And like maybe somebody else will pick up on something. So, there's, I guess for me, there's some intimidation factor of, man, I hope that I can hear something and get it out quickly enough so I can add to this collective unity that we're trying to build. So a lot of stimuli, I would say, for me, like lots of thought strains to be aware of. And
Yeah.
that was really kind of disconcerting to me, especially as just someone, I just had so much insecurity for so long for starting so late and not knowing, even though
Mm,
I progressed really quickly. So that took years for me to kind of address and get over.
makes sense. Yeah. It's funny because you said you're a very goal-oriented person and you break these down in these little goals and you're able to judge your progress. But I've also heard you say that you like are not a big planner, like large scale, the the overall direction of like where your career was going or what you were going towards, you didn't seem to have a clear intention for. Is that
Yeah,
true?
totally. Yes.
Was that has that changed over time or is it still the kind of case where you're just kind of going where you're going? And is that stressful for you?
It's not stressful for me because I've had enough experience not knowing what the future holds to be at peace with that. I've also, yes, the answer is yes, I still am like that. I would say I do not have completely well thought out and planned goals that are very, very, very long term and very, very, very specific. They're very broad, but I do like to keep kind of a two steps ahead sort of organization with my goals.
Okay.
Part of the reason for that is because I know that maybe the opportunities that I want to ultimately do have not been created yet, or I haven't met the people yet. And so
Mm.
I think that's the exciting part. It's like we could meet somebody exciting that has a really good collaborative thing that we could pair up with them and do, but that hasn't happened yet. So it is vague, but I also am kind of specific in the vagueness, and that might not make no sense at all.
No,
So
it does. I like that.
yeah. So I mean, for example, yeah, I could say, okay, my goal by the end of the month is to be able to play XYZ. And then I formulate a plan. Those are not goals that stress me out. When it comes to career stuff, I like to explore what feels right for me and to really immerse myself in it. That's the other thing. It's like when I do something, I'm laser focused on the thing. And so I know that about myself and I know that I can trust myself once I'm kind of in that obsession of the new thing that I want to accomplish. I know that I will immerse myself so much that I'll figure out if this is for me, if this is going to work, what are some other opportunities that might go from that. So I'm a pretty adventurous and like laid back kind of a vibe as far as those things. But I like to look at the future as something that could be very exciting instead of something that, oh crap, if I don't plan this out, I'm doomed.
I like that a lot. It sounds much more it just sounds like a more enjoyable outlook on things. And that's super cool. And it's interesting to me that I mean, there will have been a long list of all the things you do in the intro to this show, but your career is really multifaceted and it's taken you all over the place and you do a lot of like random work with cool people in all these different places. And knowing what the scene is like in Salt Lake City, that's so interesting to me that you've managed to build this really international traveling career from a place that's like kind of musically isolated. And I'm curious if you ever felt like you were stuck in a small scene or if you didn't really see a way to do these larger goals in the place that you were at, and what it was that you think allowed you to get to the place that you are coming from a geographically kind of segregated part of the country.
It's pretty wild, right? I know
Yeah.
people are always like, you're from Utah? What?
Well, and it's
Like,
also there are some musicians who have done that, but they left for periods of time where they went and moved somewhere. And as far as I know, you didn't move like to New York until like 2020, and that
Yeah.
was somewhat short-lived. So you really did do it all from Salt Lake City.
Yes. I think part of that is the universe wants me in the right place at the right time to meet with the right people. And I've always tried to view my music journey as I will be placed in situations and with certain people over certain times that those people will be teachers to me. And in some way, hopefully, I can help benefit them as well. And so I look at life from kind of that ethereal and holistic way, versus, okay, my number one goal is I want to be the keyboard player for Paul McCartney. That's like, I don't know if that's meant for me. I don't know if if I'm meant to be in those circles or vice versa. But I do know that there is something called synchronicity, and I notice this so much in my life, and I
Can
none
you
of it has
explain
ever
what that
been
is for me?
synchronicity, meaning right place, right time. Basically,
Okay.
when you are facing the way that your life's purpose is meant to go, you will be put in the path of things that help you along that. So it is weird. It's super weird that I went on the road touring with national Broadway tours. It's super weird that I played with Chuck Berry. It's super weird that I was touring with Colin Ray that had all these number ones that was from Nashville that didn't, you know me from Adam. It is. It's very interesting. The other thing though too is I think a comment that I've gotten from a lot of people that have worked with me have said, "You're such a breath of fresh air. You're refreshing, and you would be walking down the street and nobody would know that you're even a musician." It's true. I don't. I just look like some rando, like la la la. I'm a girl with blue hair, hanging out.
Today,
Um,
right?
Today it's blue. Yes, it will be different soon. No, so I think my vibe. I think whatever my life's purpose is, that has to do with it, and
So is it like synchronicity, things just kind of line up, and is it almost somewhat of proof that you're going in the right direction because things just happen to be where they need to be, and
yes,
that kind of natural ease and betterment in your life lets you know you're on the right track?
yeah, definitely. And I've been able to, over time, learn how to listen to my body with what is a good direction for me and what is not. I know that my body knows before my brain does sometimes. And that might not make any sense, but yeah, there's a feeling in my body that sometimes I know, like, stay away from this. It's okay. Or maybe I'm in my head thinking, oh man, I wish this person would have called me, but then I feel a certain way about it, and then later I find out that it was better that I was not involved in that particular thing. So yeah, I'm always very open to listening for direction and looking for direction on what's going to be the best overall for me and for maybe somebody else. So yeah, I've never advertised for students, and I get these students where it's just like really interesting ways that we click, and things kind of help me line up. But that's not to say that I don't work at all on doing things. That makes it kind of sound like I'm lazy. I'm not. I just am. I think that I am flexible with being open to what the future may hold. And as far as my ability to hyper focus, I when I learn something, I learn it all the way and then some. I'm obsessed with sounding authentic. I'm obsessed with leaving no stone unturned. So once I get in there, it's like I'm there. So, and that's another thing that I think with my personality, with my openness, and I, as far as I know, I've not brought drama to circles that I'm in.
What?
And with my willingness to just like kind of hyper focus and do the job, I always think I want to do the best job that is possible so that these people don't regret hiring me. And it's worked out.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you work on those things that your body is telling you is the right direction to go in, and then you know to put all your energy and work into that thing.
It's true. I've done energy work in the past, like Reiki, and I go to a nutritionist. Like I try to really keep up on my body so that I can be in the best in tune kind of a shape, you know,
Mhm.
that's possible. So yeah, but it's fascinating. The universe is our friend if we kind of open up to it. And also there are times where we may have a lack of gigs or a lack of things we're trying to do. And I think those are very valuable experiences too. Of course, they tell us kind of maybe what our path is not meant to be, but we always learn something in the struggle. Always, always, always. So I think every single aspect of life is 100% valuable, no matter
Yeah.
how you look at it.
Hmm. Well, I mean, talking about struggles and also just how you are generally perceived as just being a very joyful person to be around and a positive energy. But in your in that same Artemis interview, at one point I just had to start writing them down because it was just kind of one after the other of like traumatic things that had happened to you. So like for context for everyone else, it was either in middle school or high school, your band director was like had a really bad energy and you had a traumatizing experience going through that. And you also had an overuse injury where you had to get surgery on your wrist. And then you get your music degree and you get married and get divorced. And then like you start just like working super hard through all this trauma and stress, which leads to like getting Epstein Barr and then like you get remarried and then get in this terrible car accident. So you have like high functioning depression and years of physical therapy, and then that same husband dies like completely
Yeah, random.
unexpected. And then you're on this podcast saying that like struggles are a good thing and they happen for a reason. What is it about you that allows you to like go through all of these things, which any one of those could have been a whole podcast episode on here of talking about how to like overcome that thing and still enjoy playing music. And you've gone through all this and seem just so positive. What's your secret?
It is wild. I know. I'm going to write a Lifetime movie one day. It's going to be very shocking. It'll be based on my life. So I think that because I always love to learn and I'm always thinking of life in terms of we're here to learn and we're here to help others, that's definitely what's gotten me through. I remember laying in my bed after my husband died, and I'm still, of course, recovering from my car accident. And I was looking at the ceiling. I can totally visualize this. I was staring at the ceiling. I know the spot I was staring at, and I just thought, you've got to be kidding me. I'm sitting here, like, I've been through so many things, and now this, like, really? And I had started feeling better slightly from my car accident the day before. And then it was like, boom. And I just thought of all of the times where I had to baby step it. I had so much pain. I mean, I still have to go to appointments. Sorry about the dogs. I
We're
still
good.
have to go to appointments, and it's been like 6 years almost, right? And so um the thought that came to my mind was not I can't do this, but how can I do this?
Mm.
I will do this. I know how to do this. And this is going to sound so funny. And I can't remember if I talked about this on Emily's podcast or not. And to somebody might think this sounds so trite, but I think because I remember the full journey of me going from a classical pianist to a jazz pianist, it was such a life changer for me because it even changed aspects of my personality as far as being willing to let go of stress and go with the flow. I thought, okay, I've been in this car accident. I started doing baby steps. Like I looked back at my progression and I'm like, yeah, I'm not healed yet, but I did see some progress and it took a long time. And part of that was only doing the bare minimum and the foundational stuff only for months, noticing no progress. And then I started noticing slight progress. So I'm like, okay, I can do this. It just might, the timeline is not ideal for what I thought my healing journey should be. And then I look back to my jazz piano journey and I'm like, oh, I can do anything. I learned jazz piano. No joke. Because my goodness, a jazz pianist has to learn all the left hand styles. They have to learn all the voicings. They have to learn all the alterations. They have to learn how to comp. And in band situations, 95% of your life is comping. Then you have to learn how to solo. And then you have to learn how to solo and comp at the same time. And so there's like a part of your brain where you're just like, I'm actually just like trying to get my hemispheres to talk to each other. Like, if I can learn jazz piano, I can do anything. If I can go through this car accident and I can get to the point where I'm sort of jogging around the block, I can do anything. My husband is dead. I have car accident injuries. I can do this. I don't know how because there's no path for me forward. None. I have no idea what I'm going to do. He didn't leave me with life insurance. It was in the middle of the winter. I couldn't shovel my walks because of my injuries. I had to pay for a funeral that was $20,000. I had to pay for medical bills, even though he died after a tonsillectomy, like a super random, like freak thing. Paying for those medical bills, learning how to navigate. Okay, now we were not living, or we did not own the house where we were living. So I had to move out. So I was temporarily homeless. Like all these things, I've been at the lowest of the low, as far as not self-inflicted things. So all these things, like I just showed up in the day and they happened to me. I showed up and then my first husband happened to be an abusive alcoholic. Okay, well, I can get through that. I've had so much trauma since my first marriage that I forgot about my first marriage and forgot about the alcoholism and the abuse there. I totally forgot. So just kind of as a framework for trauma. But the things that I've learned along the way, and it's always in those quiet moments where I'm reflecting, is there's a voice inside that's like, Mel, your soul is resilient. You can always heal. You can always keep moving forward. And I want to say that, and on the flip side, talk about toxic positivity, which is very common to talk about right now. Moving forward and being able to work through these issues in no way is by ignoring the struggle. It's not by ignoring pain. It's not by ignoring grief. What these struggles do to us as humans is, yeah, you can see them as bad or good or neutral, but what they do is they expand our capacity for all of it. So yes, I have had my soul taken apart, excavated. There's a big hole in my body where I feel like there is a big void. However, I also can fill that void with gratitude, with love, yes, also with emptiness, yes, with anger, yes, with resentment. It's not fair. None of the stuff that happened to me was caused by anything that I did. And I mean, I guess you could look at that as a good thing too, because then I don't have anger at a specific person. You know what I mean? But it's all in how you look at it. It's all about our thoughts. And we get to create what our experience is. Now, as far as grief, man, I mean, I've been through the trauma, right? Grief is nothing like any of that other stuff. None of it. It is just, it's one of those things that until you go through it and you lose somebody very close to you, especially somebody that shares your bed, shares your house, shares your life, shares your future, shares like the menial tasks of your day, shares your fights, right? Your little arguments. Until that is all gone, it's really hard to understand the magnitude of what that loss is and how it affects you. I had people say to me before he was even buried, oh, you're young, you'll find somebody else. It's like, okay, I understand that you have no idea what you're talking about, because it's hard. And I thought I would not know that this pain was even possible before my husband died. I would say those things to somebody too, probably. So I'm just continually learning, and it's been eye-opening to me. Like, I thought I'd been through a lot, and I thought I had come back from a lot and come through like relatively unscathed. And I wasn't sure that I was going to stay positive during this whole grief thing because it
Yeah.
sucks. I mean, and then the brain, like, I love that your podcast talks about psychological things because there are things that we are not in control of. There are
Hmm.
things that are physiological, just how they are when it comes to trauma, sudden death, or being a caretaker for somebody, or getting in a car accident, or like our mutual friend died of COVID a couple months ago. And I think some of our close friends that were close to him are feeling a little bit about, kind of those depths of the soul that you didn't even realize you had. And there's a whole lot to learn. So yes, it sucks that I've been through weird things like that and very traumatic things. On the other hand, because this stuff is so new and I don't know anything about it, it's given me a whole lot to be able to learn about and to
Yeah.
see if I can process it. And overcome is a strange word. It's a word that I would have used before my husband died, but now dealing with grief and living with grief every single day, I wouldn't use the word overcome because you never get over this stuff. But it's something that helps you be able to go through. Like hard things are like this tunnel that you go through.
Mm.
It's like there is no way around the pandemic. There's no way around our friends that have died from this. I have friends that have died by suicide because the pandemic just made their mental health worse and worse.
Yeah.
There's no way around this stuff except for to face it and go through. And self-care is a huge part of that. Giving
Right.
yourself the love and the respect and the time and the care, and that maybe for somebody that means taking a break from their music for a while, taking a
Hmm.
break from their job, re-looking at their finances to see if they can get the mental health care that they need. But man, there's a lot. So for me, I know this is
Real
a really
quick,
long.
like, well,
Yeah.
oh, if you're close to wrapping it up, I'm
Yeah.
just like running out of important questions to ask you that relate, and they just
Oh,
keep piling up, and I'm like, I got to get to these at some point.
oh yeah. Go for it.
Only because like, yeah, there were so many follow-ups that I wanted to get through for that. The first being that this podcast was like hasn't talked about trauma and grief very much, mostly because it started as just like I have not had a very hard life, like not to minimalize any of my own trauma, but really hasn't. And this has more been about like discontentment with like trying to do this and maybe not doing it in a way that's fulfilling and how to find that. And I forget that like my version of happiness, which is like trying to optimize the joy that I'm getting out of this experience, is different from someone who's overcoming serious grief and trauma. And you said that when someone was like, "Oh, you're young, you'll find someone else," had the best of intentions, right? But a terrible thing to say in the moment. Someone like me who has not experienced that whole and doesn't know what your experience is, how can I best like interact with you or someone who is in going through trauma or grief? Maybe those are different questions, but like how can I be supportive without projecting toxic positivity or being dismissive of your experience?
First of all, I love that you asked this question, and I think that's your answer
Mm,
is ask somebody. If you have somebody in your life, ask them what they need. Ask how they're feeling. Now, you are going to run across people that do not like to talk about certain things. I'm very, very open with everything in my life. So it's to me, if you come up and you ask, "Hey, how's it been since your husband has died?" It's kind of in the same casual conversation for me as if you're like, "Hey, what's that keyboard you're playing on?" It's hilarious. Like some people might be like, "Oh, wow, you are a sociopath. You have no feelings." It just isn't, it's my normal. That's all I have to say. So, but I know from my grief circle and fellow trauma survivors, that's one of the most common things said is just ask me. If
mm,
I lost somebody, ask me about them. If you have a question, ask. And but at the same time, I think it's really great for people like us to be around people that don't have the trauma because
mm,
can you imagine being around like the only people that you're talking to are like trauma survivors? You won't have any other experiences. So I do value my friends and my musician friends too, where it's like I know I can go to this jam And I'm so glad to play with somebody that doesn't even have to live what I live through on the daily,
Mm,
and see what energy they project in this jam session, and then I can ride that wave for a little bit. So
yeah.
um I think
That's cool.
it's
You
oh,
can
go
like
ahead.
actually everyone has a different perspective on how to deal with things, and it's a safe bet to just let that person tell you what their ideal way is, right?
Yeah. A lot of people say just don't ignore this big thing that I've been going through. Like people have died, and maybe someone's person has died, and then the survivor goes somewhere and people act like the dead person didn't exist, or they're just like, "Oh, well, you're fine now, right? Because it's been a month." It's like, just say, "Hey, what's up? How's it going?" For me, I like people keeping it casual, like, "Oh man, how are you doing? Like, are you okay? Cool. Here's a donut." Like, keep it casual, kind of. So, um, and then there's some people that don't even want to talk about that. I've found that a lot of the time that is the difference between, in our group at least, in like the griever group, with some of the males. A lot of times guys just want to get back to work. They're like, I don't want to talk about it. And then a lot of times women love to talk about it. So the best skill I would offer people developing is empathy. And that is by trial and error and talking to people and learning about different things that people are going through and asking questions. So, for example, I had a trans student once, and it was my first trans student that I had taught, and I wanted to know how to support. So I asked, and it was scary for me to ask because I hadn't been around a teenage trans person before, and I didn't want to offend. I wanted to like get the job done and like let's just play the piano, right? But I also knew that that was a struggle that they were going through too, as far as people accepting them and them presenting themselves to society. So I think it's always good to ask, and if you have an intention that's pure and authentic, the person will feel that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. I'm going to move on to my second follow-up question from before, which was like after going through, I mean, any number of your trials, but particularly the loss of Scott and the position you were in, oftentimes, especially when you're young, like it's fun to see people's bios and things where it's like, music is my life, music is everything. Like, and obviously, music was a huge part of your life and like your happy place and a source of so much joy. Does something like that change your relationship with it? Or is it like, were you able to just, was that the one constant? I'm curious if now you look at music as like, oh, music is not the end all be all.
I kind of never have looked at it that way because I always left room for myself to leave it if it became not fun and not something that is an enjoyable experience and supportive to me. So there's that. But when Scott died, and I might have talked about this with Emily, you know how musicians, we just hear tunes in our heads all the time. It's like on repeat. Everybody's brain is a loop, and musicians get their loops in their head or music. When Scott died, I had no music in my head. I didn't hear any sounds. I walked by a piano, I didn't feel any pull to it, and that's never happened in my life. And I thought I was done. Totally thought I was done. I was like, this is too much. I've I've had a great relationship with music all throughout my life. And now it's over. I guess I'm going to have to figure out how to do something else. And what ended up happening is Chris Johnson, who I think has been a guest of yours too,
Yeah.
he's a good friend of mine and we play together. We had a gig in Detroit a couple of weeks after the death of my husband. And he said, "Hey, Mel, your plane ticket is still valid. If you want, just come. You don't have to play with us. You can play if you want. Like, whatever works for you, works." And I said, "Chris, I don't even know if I remember how to play. I haven't touched a piano and I don't feel anything and I don't hear anything. It's just silence." And he's like, "Well, just come. It's going to be fine. You're going to be surrounded by people that love you. We're your family. Like, come on." So we go. I go and I'm just like, I don't even know if I remember anything. I'm done still. And it was the day of the concert, and we were playing at the DSO, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra Hall. And I saw my friends there. It was so great to see him. And I'm like, oh, I love these guys. I still don't hear any music and like no connection. Like, no, I'll just watch. Like, I love hearing them play. I just want to be a spectator. I'm tired. And they're like, hey, it's sound check. Just sit down. So I sat down and it was crazy. It was like all that grief had exploded the part of my brain that was the stressful part about music. And it blew that away. And so instead of some of the thoughts that normally would go through my head of like, oh yeah, that sounded good, but man, is that person judging you? All gone. And it was a big, big blessing actually. And
Yeah.
it felt like it expanded my capacity for music. And I'm a pretty visual and cerebral person when I'm learning usually, and I think that's because I grew up playing classical piano, and like I was so used to reading notes with my eyes, and then it would come out my fingers, and then I would understand. And I mean, of course, I can still do that, but it's my ear has just gone way up, and my understanding and intuition has gone up, all because of this trauma. It just blew something open, and I was shocked because I thought I was done. I'm like, I'm 35 years old. I have nothing else, no more skills. I'm gonna go work at the grocery store selling bread at Harmon's because I love sourdough. But yeah, it's actually been really beneficial to me,
Yeah.
and it's given me alternative thoughts of what is possible with my own skills and with my direction of my career.
That's, I mean, that's beautiful to hear that it unlocked something new and something great came from it, even at a cost, obviously. I know we're short on time, but one more question I'm hoping to get in is I've went through the podcast that you host, Widow We Do Now, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and early on, you guys laughed. You were like, "We got another like negative review or whatever," and it was like, we never promised for this show to be about anything. Like, we aren't attempting to add value or like share a particular advice. Like, it's really just us talking. And now, and then fast forwarding like a year and some change to where you're at now, it seems like there is more intention behind it. You have like guests, expert guests that talk about certain things, and episodes are structured for like, we're going to talk about this issue and our experience in it. And the timelines, at least like where your podcast started and mine did, are similar. And I'm feeling a lot of conflicting emotions lately because this started as me like, I feel lost and I just want to talk to some people who seem to have some sense of like belonging and fulfillment and joy doing this. And now it's like, I think I might have some attempted solutions that like could be helpful for people. And I still have this nagging voice of like, but you're still on the journey and like maybe you aren't ready to share your thoughts yet. And there's so many people out there sharing their ideas on how to improve your mental health. Like, it's not like there's a lack of people. And I'm wondering if you had a similar reservation of like, I'm going through this grief journey, like I'm not ready to tell or like give advice on how someone else should do that. And like what your relationship with sharing is, if that at this point, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I totally understand. I think where you're at, and yeah. So yes, my friend who's a widow, Anita, and we started a podcast, and mostly at first we just were so blindsided by the fact that we were widows, and so we thought, let's start this. Probably nobody's going to listen except our moms, so who cares? It'll be at least fun for us. And then, yeah, when the pandemic started, we started interviewing people on Zoom. And this is kind of going back to that question that we were talking about before, where you were asking me about planning and goal setting and stuff like that. It's like I never had the goal that it was going to take over the widow community. I just had to. I was in the point where I had to just take a few steps
Mm,
because it was hard just to make a few steps. And so I'm not comfortable being an expert on something that I'm going through at the moment. However, I am 2 steps ahead of the people that are 2 steps behind me.
mm,
And I'm comfortable offering my experience with my own set of opinions and experiences in the hopes that it helps somebody. And one thing that's actually helped me in various research that I've done, just with even promoting your own, like say you make an online course or something, they tell you with marketing that whatever you put out there, you are both going to attract people and you're going to repel people. And both of those things are good. I think it's so in our minds when we're starting out, all we want is for everybody to love us and everybody to listen to us and everybody to do this. And reality is it's going to be a long journey. And along the journey, you're going to collect your kind. And you're also going to repel people that are like not into listening to it right now. And that's fine. And that's okay. And I don't know if you've heard of the saying, everybody, most people like peaches. A lot of people like peaches, right? But there are always going to be people that don't like peaches. You maybe not be able to understand that because peaches are amazing. They're so great. But this person over here is like, I hate that. That's so gross. So, kind of different strokes for different folks. But yeah, as far as sharing with our podcast, of course, we love to get therapeutic experts on there because they're trained in the brain and they're trained in grief and they're trained in trauma. But also, what we've noticed with we have a private Facebook group for widows and widowers is the feedback that we get. They say, I am so grateful for my mental health professionals in my life. I'm so grateful for my friends and family, but I get the most support and feel the most validation and feel like I'm moving forward the most when I'm in this community talking to other people in my situation. And so, yeah, maybe we're not experts in some things, but we are experts in the struggles that we're going through. So, I think what you're doing is so great, Tanner, and it's a unique and a fresh approach. And your experiences are valid, definitely. And you're
Yeah.
always going to be able to mentor somebody who is a few steps behind you.
Yeah, that does mean a lot, and honestly, that response helped me work through some things, so I'm grateful for that and everything you've shared and just for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you.